this up to date here. Paul has ended his third and his last missionary journey that, as Luke's accounts record. And he arrived in Jerusalem, and as soon as he got there, he was met with a problem. There was a false rumor that Paul had been instructing Jewish Christians not to have their children circumcised. And so the church leadership devises this plan to dispel the rumor. But somewhere along the way, he gets confronted by a group of Asian Jews in the temple, and he's accused of defiling the temple by bringing this a Gentile into a non-Jew into a Jew-only area, and a bit of a riot ensues, and that riot draws the attention of the tribune of the Roman garrison in Antonia Fortress. That's adjacent to the temple grounds there. And this gets Paul arrested, but he gets an opportunity to address the crowd, and that doesn't go real well. And so the tribune decides to have Paul beaten to get information out of him. And Paul then claims Roman citizenship, and that changes everything for him. The tribune needs more information for a formal Roman trial, so he takes Paul before the Sanhedrin. But that ends in a violent argument, and in the meantime, as Paul is kept under arrest in the fortress, a plot gets hatched to have Paul killed. But Paul's nephew learns of the plot, and the tribune gets informed, and Paul gets escorted by 400 plus soldiers towards Caesarea in the middle of the night, and that's where we pick up where we ended last time. Karen, do you want to start 31 to 35, please?
Chapter 23.
Yes.
So the soldiers, carrying out their orders, took Paul with them during the night and brought them as far as Antipatris. The next day, they let the cavalry go on with him while they returned to the barracks. When the cavalry arrived in Caesarea, they delivered the letter to the governor and handed Paul over to him. The governor read the letter and asked what province he was from. Learning he was from Cilicia, he said, "I will hear your case when your accusers get here." Then he ordered that Paul be kept under guard in Herod's palace.
So they hiked and they rode all night, and Antipatris was about 35 to 40 miles from Jerusalem, depending upon where the actual site of the city is. And the Roman foot soldiers were always in great shape, and they were accustomed to long marches without sleep. But the next day, being out of immediate danger, they sent the foot soldiers back to Jerusalem, and then they went on by horseback so they could travel faster on to Caesarea, which is the provincial capital. And when they arrived there, Paul and the tribune's letter are presented to Felix. And one thing Felix needed to determine was whether or not Paul was in his jurisdiction. Now, at this time, both Judea, this area down here, and Cilicia, up here where Tarsus is, was part of a greater province, a Roman province of Syria. It's part of this whole thing here. And Cilicia wasn't actually part of Felix's domain. Felix could have handled the case off to someone else, but his superior would have expected Felix to handle the situation himself. So, being politically expedient, he does that. And it was normal for Roman officials to wait for the accusers to bring their charges. And in the meantime, Paul was housed in the Praetorium, and this was a palace that was built by Herod the Great. And Felix allowed Paul to be kept under guard there. And this is an indication that Paul was considered a high-status prisoner. Otherwise, he would have just been thrown into a dungeon somewhere. Chapter 24. Harvey, you want to take that 1 through 9, please?
Sure. After 5 days, the high priest Ananias came down with some elders. with an attorney named Tertullus, and they brought charges to the governor against Paul. After Paul had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying to the governor, "Since we have through you attained much peace, and since by your providence reforms are being carried out for this nation, we acknowledge this in every way and everywhere, most excellent Felix, and with all thankfulness. But that I may not weary you any further, I beg you to grant us, by your kindness, a brief hearing. For we have found this man a real pest, and a fellow who stirs up dissension among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. And he even tried to desecrate the temple, and then we arrested him. We wanted to judge him according to our own law, but Lysias, the commander, came along and with much violence took him out of our hands, ordering his accusers to come before you. By examining him yourself concerning all these matters, you will be able to ascertain the things which we have accused him." The Jews also joined in the attack, asserting that these things were so.
So this is the first of two formal trials that Paul's going to get in Caesarea. And Tertullus is a Gentile name, and so it was likely he was a professional attorney of some kind. Some of your translations actually state that. And he begins with a little respectful buttering up of the governor. But all that Tertullus said about Felix was completely false. Felix had the least peaceful term of any Roman administrator up until this time. And he was far more likely to take a bribe than to be benevolent. And besides
It
that,
sounded sure good, though.
yeah, it did. Yeah, it really
Wow,
did.
it sounded good.
And besides all that, the Jews hated him. But Tertullus's testimony was also nearly completely false, and as was typical of trials in those days, he began by attacking Paul's character. And notice also that Tertullus's argument included that Paul only tried to defile the temple, probably because there was no real proof that he had actually succeeded in doing that. Now, the real issue for the Jewish leadership was that Paul's witness was effective. And it drew large numbers of Jews, thereby reducing the influence of the leadership, and had drawn large numbers of Gentiles into the Jewish circle. And the other issue was that Paul taught Jesus as the Messiah, which they rejected. And they wanted all of this stopped. But none of this was part of their argument against Paul here before Felix. Chris, you want to read 10 through 21, please?
When the governor mentioned for him to speak, Paul replied, "I know that for a number of years you have been judge over the nation, so I would gladly make my defense. You can easily verify that no more than 12 days ago I went up to Jerusalem to worship my my accusers did not find me arguing with anyone at the temple, or stirring up any crowd in the synagogues, or anywhere else in the city, and they cannot prove to you the charges they are now making against me. However, I admit that I worship the God of our fathers as a follower of the way, which they call a sect. I believe everything that agrees with the law and that is written in the prophets. And I have the same hope in God as these men, that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and of the wicked. So I strive always to keep my conscience clear before God and man. After an absence of several years, I came to Jerusalem to bring my people gifts for the poor and to present offerings. I was ceremonially clean when they found me in the temple courts doing this. There was no crowd with me, nor was I involved in any disturbance. But there are some Jews from the province of Asia who ought to be here before you and bring charges if they have anything against me. Or these who are here should state what crime they found me in when I stood before the Sanhedrin, unless it was this one thing I shouted as I stood in the presence. It is concerning the resurrection of the deal that I am on trial before today.
So this is the first of two formal trials that Paul will get here in Caesarea. I already said that, didn't I? All right, moving on down. So now it's Paul's turn. And Paul does not falsely praise the governor here. All he does is acknowledge his position. There's no false flattery. Really, there wasn't anything to praise him for anyway. And so he begins his defense by refuting the charges. And he claims the opposition could not prove he was contentious or had caused a single riot or tried to defile the temple. And the only charge he does not refute here is that of being a ringleader. But in the amount of time he had spent there, he wouldn't have had much time to do any of what he was claimed against him anyway. That's probably why he mentions the 12 days. The next thing he does is contend that he is a devout, law-following Jew, and in that he has a clear conscience. And the only thing he was doing in Jerusalem was to bring relief funds and present offerings. Now, the bringing of alms was considered a very honorable thing. And Paul uses this to build himself up here in the eyes of Felix. And when the riot started, he was just in the temple undergoing purification rites. And he wasn't fomenting anything, implying that it was the Asians who were the ones actually causing the riot. And besides that, the temple was considered an asylum. And to attack someone there was a violation of that sacred place, which is what the Asians did. And besides all this, the Jews from Asia who started this whole thing ought to have been there to present their case. They were the real accusers. And by Roman law, they were required to present their case face to face with the accused. Now, as in trials today, the burden of proof was on the accusers. And Paul points out that the real accusers are not there. And then Paul offers his account of the episode before the Sanhedrin that was ordered by the tribune. And he says, "Let these men present here tell you what wrongdoing they found in me there at that meeting." And the only thing they have to offer is an argument about the resurrection of the dead, which was a majority belief in Judaism anyway. And this, of course, would bear on Paul's belief in the resurrection of the Messiah. But what Paul had done was to maneuver the charges around to the real reason that he was on trial. And Paul's strategy here is to reinforce that this whole thing is a matter of Jewish law, not Roman law. And with that, Paul rests his case. And I'm going to suggest here, based on commentaries, that this was not the entire trial. This is probably Luke's Reader's Digest version of what went on. And on the basis of what is presented here, the whole case should have been immediately thrown out. Fran, you want to take 22 and 23?
Okay. You know, my takeaway from that, in verse 16 there, I just love this because he says, "I myself always strive to have a conscience without offense toward God and man." I think I ought to put that on my kitchen cupboard this week. You know, I mean, daily, to be able to look at that and say, today, you know, I want to strive to have a conscience clear between God and man. And wow,
Yeah.
what a focus to have. Because after that, it's all good. You
Well,
know?
not only that, but have that on your refrigerator or on your bathroom mirror at the end of the day, and you could reflect and
Yeah,
say, hey,
exactly.
have I lived up to that today?
Yeah. You know, that really speaks to my heart.
Yeah, and Paul lived by that.
Yeah, he did, which is so cool to be able to go in front of these men with confidence, knowing that my conscience is clear between God and man. Man, that causes for some good sleep. You know, I mean, you can sleep good.
Maybe that's why I can't sleep.
There you go.
Try that, I
gosh.
guess. Okay.
Okay, but when Felix heard these things, having more accurate knowledge of the way, I love that, the way, that just so speaks to my heart. He adjourned the proceedings and said, when Lysias, the commander, comes down, I will make a decision on your case. So he commanded the centurion to keep Paul and to let him have liberty, and told him not to forbid any of his friends to provide for his visit him.
That the case was not immediately tossed requires a little bit of explaining. Now, Felix was corrupt, and the previous governor before Felix was actually removed because of complaints by the same high priest Ananias. So Felix had to be really careful here. The accusers before him here were of a high status and could really truly impact his future. So what should have been a clear case for dismissal was turned into a political issue. And so Felix does not make a decision other than the decision not to make a decision. And he uses the excuse of needing to hear the testimony of the tribune Lysias. But Luke doesn't record any of his testimony, if there ever was any. But because Paul is a Roman citizen and of some importance, he's placed under what looks like kind of a house arrest. Ken, you want to read 24 through 27?
Several days later, Felix came and with his wife Drusilla. Well, if I would have known that name, I would have named Jessica then. Drusilla. Who was a
Like
Jewess.
the name of a witch.
It does, exactly.
Really? At least it's not Jezebel. Or
Yeah.
Drusilla. He sent for Paul and listened to him as he spoke about faith in Christ Jesus. As Paul discouraged, as Paul discouraged on righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix was afraid and said, "That's enough for now. You may leave. When I find it convenient, I will send for you." At the same time, he was hoping that Paul would offer him a bribe. So he sent for him frequently and talked with him. When 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus. But because Felix wanted to grant a favor to the Jews, he left Paul in prison.
So apparently Felix had left and come back, probably from Jerusalem. And this time his wife is with him. And this Drusilla is an interesting character. She was the daughter of Herod Agrippa I, and she was the sister to Agrippa II. And we're going to see him in the next chapter here. Now, their marriage was a bit of a scandal because Felix had played a part in Drusilla's divorce from her first husband when she was only 16 years old. And Felix convinced her to marry him. This is a real soap opera here. So Felix sends for Paul on many occasions, and Paul boldly talks to Felix about godly character, and I'll bet that went over real well. And a person's need for faith in Christ and how all of that related to a coming judgment. And all this had Felix scared, and you can imagine why. Most people really don't want to hear that because of their lifestyle and lack of belief, things may not go well for them in a final judgment. But it's the truth, and Paul did not shy away from it, even though Felix was to be Paul's judge and have the power of life and death over him. But Paul knew, and we also need to recognize, it's not people who have the power of life and death. God alone has the power of life and death. And apparently, Paul and Felix had many conversations, and this went on for 2 whole years. And Paul had to be wondering, what do I have to do to get out of here? And there's 2 reasons given as to why Felix kept Paul that long. One is he hoped Paul would offer him a bribe. And this was completely illegal by Roman law, but was very commonly overlooked. And the other reason was because Felix wanted to stay on the good side of the Jerusalem leadership. Now remember, they had some sway over him based upon the last Roman official, who the high priest Ananias caused to be removed. But in AD 59, Felix actually was removed from office for failing to deal with the conflict between the Jews and the Gentiles there in Caesarea. And the next governor was named Porcius Festus, and we're going to talk about him in the next chapter, which is coming right up. April, you want to read 1 through 5, please?
I have a question.
Okay.
So did he want Paul to give him a bribe because he wanted the money, or because he was trying to catch him up in something?
I suspect he wanted the money. He was corrupt, he was greedy.
Oh.
And maybe both, I don't know, but I hadn't actually ever thought of that. Interesting observation.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. I was like,
So where to where?
1 through 5.
Thank you. Now when Festus had come to the province after 3 days, he went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem. And the high priest and the chief men of the Jews informed him against Paul, and they petitioned him, asking a favor against him, that he would summon him to Jerusalem, while they lay in ambush along the road to kill him. But Festus answered that Paul should be kept at Caesarea, and that he himself was going there shortly. Therefore, he said, let those who have authority among you go down with me and accuse this man, to see if there's any fault in him.
Now about this Festus, he was appointed by Nero in 59 AD, but he died in 60 AD, so he didn't govern there for very long. The only information we have on him outside of what we read right here is from Josephus, and he presents that all of these things and others eventually led to the Jewish revolt in 66 to 72 AD. And so this Festus is the new guy on the block, and when he arrives, he immediately heads for Jerusalem to meet with the Jerusalem leadership there, wanting to start off on the right foot with them. And remember that this same Sanhedrin okayed a plot 2 years earlier by a group of Jews to have Paul killed. And this time, they hatched their own plot. And since this Festus is new, they think they can convince him to bring Paul back to Jerusalem for a trial there. And the plan is to ambush Paul on the way and kill him. Now it seems strange that after 2 years of Paul being out of circulation, they still feel it's necessary to have him killed. But this is from the Sanhedrin. This is from the leaders of the Jews worldwide. This is completely against their laws. And it really is outright murder of an uncondemned man. And Paul's never been on trial before them or ever been convicted of even their own laws. But somehow in their minds they must have felt this was justified. So Festus says, this is not happening. And told him, I'm going back to Caesarea, and you can come with me and present your case there. Sarah, do you want to read 6 through 12?
After he had spent not more than 8 or 10 days among them, he went down to Caesarea, and on the next day he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. After Paul arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many and serious charges against him, which they could not prove. Well, Paul said in his own defense, I have committed no offense either against the law of the Jews or against the temple or against Caesar. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, answered Paul and said, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial before me on these charges? But Paul said, I am standing before Caesar's tribunal, where I ought to be tried. I have done no wrong to the Jews, as you also very well know. If then I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything worthy of death, I do not refuse to die. But if none of those things is true, of which these men accuse me, no one can hand me over to them. I appeal to Caesar. Then when Festus had conferred with his council, he answered, you have appealed to Caesar you shall go.
So poor Paul, after 2 years of expecting to get released, he has to go through this all over again. But whatever charges were brought against Paul, the Jews could not offer any solid proof. And in his defense, Paul claims he had not violated any law at all, not Jewish law, not against the temple, not Roman law, which is the only thing he should have been tried for in a Roman court. But Festus knows to let Paul go would be politically undesirable, being as he was the new guy in charge. So Festus, as a favor to the Jews, offers Paul the opportunity to have his case tried in Jerusalem. But Paul knows he won't get a fair trial there. And besides that, he's been the object of plots on his life there before. And he knows what could potentially happen. And I have to think that in the back of his mind, he believes that to be turned loose could even be hazardous to his health. And so Paul proclaims correctly that by law he is being tried right where he is supposed to be. And besides, there's no proof he'd done anything against the Jews that would cause him to have to be tried in Jerusalem. And Paul knows, and he knows Festus knows, that he should be set free. Now, Paul it declares here that he's not afraid to die. And I have to suspect that his motivation is to live for the sake of proclaiming the message God has given him. And so I'm speculating here too that Paul feels the best place for him is to get to travel to Rome, which is where he wanted to go, under the safety of a Roman guard. And this would also provide him with the opportunity to present the gospel to the most powerful office in the entire Western world. And to do that, he appeals to Caesar. Now, I mentioned last week that it was most common for this appeal to be made following an unfavorable court decision. But it could occur any time during the trial. And again, this trial was not automatic. And it was common for Roman administrators to have an advisory board of high-ranking officials. And, so Festus sends this request off to them, and it comes back with their decision. That was a valid request. And so it was granted. Dear, you want to read 13 through 22?
Now when several days had elapsed, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived in Caesarea and paid their respects to Festus. And while they were spending many days there, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, there is a certain man left a prisoner by Felix. And when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews brought charges against him, asking for a sentence of condemnation upon him. And I answered them that it is not the custom of the Romans to hand over any man before the accused meets his accusers face to face and has an opportunity to make his defense against the charges. And so after they had assembled here, I made no delay, but on the next day took my seat on the tribunal and ordered the man to be brought. When the accusers stood up, they began bringing charges against him, not of such crimes as I was expecting, but they simply had some points of disagreement with him about their own religion and about a certain dead man, Jesus, whom Paul asserted to be alive. And being at a loss whether he was willing to go to Jerusalem and there stand trial on these matters, but when Paul appealed to be held in custody for the emperor's decision, I ordered him to be kept in custody until I send him to Caesar. All through 22?
Yep, one more.
And Agrippa said to Festus, I also would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, he said, you shall hear.
All right, some more new folks. This Agrippa is Marcus Julius Agrippa, or Agrippa II. He is the great-grandson of Herod the Great. and the son of Agrippa the First. And you'll remember this particular Agrippa the First, he was the guy that wore the shiny silver clothing, and it caused the crowd to want to elevate him to deity status. And this led to his death in AD 44 by rotting because of his failure to give the glory to whom it rightly belonged. It was a bad move on his part. Now, this Agrippa II here was only 17 when his father died. But the Emperor Claudius, at the advice of his counselors, delayed his appointment for 6 years until 50 AD. And it started out with a small piece of what is now Lebanon here, but it later expanded to include all of Galilee and parts of all of Galilee. It actually started up here in Lebanon, and then eventually all of Galilee, and actually some parts of the area east of the Jordan River too, of what we would consider now called the Golan Heights. But although he was strongly tied to Rome, he made attempts to create goodwill with the Jews. But when war broke out in 66 AD, he was solidly on the side of Rome, even though he tried unsuccessfully to prevent the war. And because of his loyalty, he gave kingship over the entire nation. And he reigned until his death somewhere in the 90s AD. And so one commentator said that he actually had reigned as king longer than any other king in the history of Israel. Now, his arrival at Caesarea at this time was likely a courtesy call on the new procurator, and since at this time he had no jurisdiction over this part of the country. Now, Bernice here is not his wife. Bernice is his younger sister. And there's no record of him ever being married or leaving any children. But apparently they were best buds and they were often seen together. So while they're visiting, Festus tells Agrippa about this case as he inherited it from Felix. And as he lays out the history of the trial, he does it pretty accurately here. And this was a good opportunity for him to get some feedback from someone who would be more familiar with Jewish things than he was. And Agrippa II was one of the few Herods that actually had Jewish blood. He actually had some Hyrcanus ancestry. And the Hyrcanus clan was responsible for the Maccabean revolt in the 150s BC.
Mike, so this is
Yes.
Agrippa II?
This is Agrippa II.
And his sister Bernice, so Bernice is a sister to Drusilla, and Drusilla is a Jew?
Bernice is a sister to Agrippa. No, okay. Let's see, Bernice. No, let me think. Bernice is a sister of Agrippa.
So is this Agrippa II right here?
This is Agrippa II, who's here present in this
With Bernice?
trial with Bernice.
So right up here on 24, when you mentioned Drusilla, I thought you said that Drusilla was the daughter of Herod Agrippa I and the
Yes.
sister of Agrippa II.
Correct.
So
That's her
Drusilla and
brother.
Bernice.
That's her brother. That would be Agrippa II's sister also.
So he had two sisters.
sisters.
And one was Jewish,
Right.
Drusilla. Okay, got it, okay. Just trying to make the family tree here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a good, yeah,
Yes.
that was good.
Okay, where am I?
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
I threw you off track.
That's okay, I just have to remember what page I'm on. All right, so, I just get done saying. Okay. So, anyway, his conclusion from the testimonies is that the Jews had not presented an adequate case that had anything to do with Roman laws. And it's just exactly the same thing that Paul had claimed. And Festus is agreeing with this conclusion. And the only dispute about their own religion and some Jew who claimed that, who the Jews claimed is dead, but who Paul claimed is alive. And that was really the only dispute they could come up with. Now, the use of the word religion here is a Greek word that's being used in a derogatory sense. Now, Festus is being derogatory about Christianity. He's equating it here with superstition. And so instead of being willing to go to Jerusalem for trial, Paul was granted an appeal to Caesar. And Agrippa's response is, I'd like to hear from this guy myself. So 23, Joyce, are you up? 23 through 27, please.
The next day Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp and entered the audience room with the high-ranking officers and the leading men of the city. At the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. Festus said, King Agrippa, and all who are present with us, you see this man? The whole Jewish community has petitioned me about him in Jerusalem and here in Caesarea, shouting that he ought not to live any longer. I found he had done nothing deserving of death, but because he made his appeal to the emperor, I decided to send him to Rome. But I have nothing definite to write to his majesty about him. Therefore I have brought him before all of you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that as a result of this investigation, I may have something to write, for I think it is unreasonable to send on a prisoner without specifying the charges against him.
Don't you just love the word Paul? just describes it so well, doesn't it? So Paul gets brought in the next day to this show, and it's not just Festus and Agrippa, but a whole lot of other important people there as well. And Festus repeats his conclusion that Paul's done nothing to deserve what the Jews